Good morning, everyone. We're just going to give it a few more minutes to allow people to enter the room, and then we can start. Okay, so we have a pretty packed agenda today, so let's go ahead and start. And it's being recorded, so we can go revisit if we have someone who couldn't join from the very beginning. So first of all, good morning and welcome to the final Trust Masterclass. Very happy to have you here and to see that you're here with us over the past months as well, where we've explored how to build trust in biotech through co-creation. And today, finally, we're here very excited to share some of the key lessons that we've learned these past months. So you will be hearing today directly from the team involved who led the process, see what the participants shared with us, and get a sneak peek, a first look at the measures that we're co-designing to support trusted and transparent biotech innovations. So let's dive in on this packed session. Just before we start, I just wanted to share a quick couple of things. So we are recording this session and it will be shared on the BTrust forum. You can come back to it later. You can share it with your colleagues or anyone who you think might be interested who couldn't come back today. And of course, you can rewatch it yourself. Also, to avoid background noise, I believe not everyone will have permission to unmute themselves or to share their camera, but just in case, please remain muted unless you're invited to jump in. And then last, but the most important one, if you have any questions or comments or thoughts that come up during the session, please feel free to share them in the chat or in the Q&A box. We will either get to them as we go or come back to them at the end of the session, depending on how we are keeping the schedule. So wanted to share with you a quick look at what we'll cover today's 90-minute webinar. So starting with a brief introduction to the BTrust project, on why trust and co-creation matter. We'll walk through then on how we applied the co-creation methods, who was involved, how the sessions were run, why we chose this approach instead of traditional surveys, so very interesting. Next, we will be sharing what we learned from consumers, farmers, and the industry. And we'll also look at how these insights have helped us co-design the practical trust building measures. So you will be able to get a sneak peek at those measures. And finally, we will be wrapping up with some Q&A and share with you how you can stay involved as part of the BTrust community. So why BTrust? So biotech is transforming Europe's future. It's creating greener industries, it's reducing waste, and it's offering sustainable solutions in the agri-food and the bio-based sectors. However, at least 50% of the potential impact of these innovations depends on public attitudes and the governance mechanisms that we apply to ensure its responsible use. So how are we doing it in BTrust? We are developing and deploying an innovative governance model based on 4 key pillars. Each one of these 4 pillars is a fundamental building block for unlocking and creating and maintaining trust in biotech. So we tested 6 real-world biotech cases as our experimental grounds. And these range from cell factories and biotech-derived biomaterials to biofertilizers, cultivated meat, climate-resilient crops, so a wide range of different biotech applications. We applied co-creation and are applying co-design sessions with all the key stakeholders, what is called the quintuple helix, including society, academia, industry, policymakers, and the environment. And these have been tested across Belgium, Denmark, and Spain. And a brief introduction of the project consortium. The project is being carried out by 7 organizations from 4 different countries, Belgium, Italy, Denmark, and Spain, bringing together a really diverse mix from clusters, SMEs, and RTO, which this mix of perspectives is what makes, in my opinion, the BTrust consortium so strong, because we're combining policy, practice, and research. And now, without any further ado, what you're all here to learn, I would like to give the floor to Virle, who will be talking to us about co-creation methodology. So Virle, the floor is all yours.
Thank you, Sophia. Thank you. Good morning, everybody. Let me just first share my screen. Okay, and I'll put it in presenter mode. Just give me a second. Okay.
Perfect. Thank you.
Perfect. Okay, thank you. Yes, so why do we look at this trust issues and this trust when it comes to new technologies, and in this case, biotechnology? So why do people distrust or refuse to accept new technologies? There are several aspects there that we have to point out. First of all, there's the fear of what we call neophobia, the fear of anything that is new or unfamiliar. And especially when it comes to food, this is a really important aspect to consider. So people often don't like new stuff or have fear of things that they don't know. The second aspect that is enhancing distrust is technophobia, so fear for new technologies, and specifically with somewhat older people, this can be a thing. They don't see the need of new technology. They want to stick to old solutions. They fear the unknown and the consequences of this technology, and how will this impact their lives, their world, and what are the risks and consequences of this new technology. So these are 2 very important aspects that enhance distrust in new technologies, and in this case, in the case of BTrust, biotechnology. So this is why we basically based our methodology on this these aspects, on the digging for trust, actually. So, and in a nutshell, we first of all looked at who is most affected by this new technology by biotechnology? Are they affected negatively? So what are the risks and to what degree? But also, do they have anything to gain from it? What are the benefits that they perceive and feel? And to what degree? And how large is this group? So how big is their impact? How could they hold back the successful implementation? And how could they also maybe boost the successful implementation of this technology? Yeah, if we want to address these trust issues, we needed to understand these trust and acceptance issues. So to better understand these trust issues, we decided to use co-creation, because according to us, co-creation is really a very interesting approach to really better understand how people look at biotechnology and what do they associate with it, what are their concerns, and also how can we together with them co-create solutions to avoid doom scenarios. So really create a dialogue together with them. We decided to use co-creation and not go for a survey as starting point of our research, because with co-creation you can really dig a lot deeper and find solutions together with them. Mind you, we did use previous research surveys, etc., as starting point to develop our methodology, and we will, after the co-creation trajectories that we have set up in the framework of BTrust, also validate specific findings, messages, concerns, etc., via quantitative analysis, which we are basically at this point setting up. So this is again the BTrust governance model. When it comes to the co-creation trajectories, we are looking at the third pillar there. So shifting to value co-creation. It says here with citizens and consumers, but we did change that in the course of the methodology we developed. So I will guide you through that after this. So we did set up co-creation trajectories, and we did that. These trajectories each time consisted of 3 phases. So the first phase is what we called the explore phase. I'll give you a short overview of the different phases here, and we'll dig in me at first on the explore phase. So the explore phase was developed around what we called 6 biotech co-creation cases. I will dig into deeper later on. So, but these cases were really used as test beds to develop the co-creation trajectories and also to develop the methodology. We did stakeholder mappings per case to see like who is most affected and who is most influenced by this specific biotech case. And also we explored perceptions of those most affected by them, and also we identified trust barriers, starting from these risk-benefit analysis. So in total, we did 11 co-creation sessions in Belgium, Denmark, and Spain. We did 6 co-creation sessions with consumers, but also 4 co-creation sessions with farmers, because they are also highly affected by these biotech cases, and 1 with the chemical industry. The next phase, so this was all about the explore phase. In a next phase, which we call the assess phase, we analyzed the results from these co-creation sessions. So the perceptions of consumers, farmers, and the industry, and then we derived from that drivers and also trust barriers, which in the next phase, starting from these key drivers and trust barriers, we developed trust building measures and interventions to enhance trust in these biotech cases or biotechnology in general. We didn't do that alone. We did that together with the actors that are highly impacted by the lack of trust in these technologies, like investors, industry, and also academia. And we did that via co-design sessions. These co-design sessions haven't finished, so but my the partners will elaborate on that later on in this masterclass. So then, which brings me to the first phase where I elaborate a bit more on the explore phase. So the explore phase consisted of several steps. So we first did these risk-benefit assessments, where we basically per case mapped the risks associated with it and the benefits associated with the case, but from scientific literature. We also did stakeholder mappings per case, and then we evaluated the importance of the different stakeholders. So how big is their influence? How big are the benefits they get from the implementation of the technology, and how big are the risks? Starting from these mappings and these risk benefits assessments, we prioritized the stakeholders. We also developed the methodology, because it will be different according to the stakeholders that are involved in the trajectories. We built the trajectories and then we rolled them out. So this is in a nutshell, but now I'll go a little bit more into detail. So like I already said, and also mentioned by Sophia, we used 6 biotech cases basically as test beds to set up these co-creation trajectories and also to develop our methodology. These cases were selected together with the other partners and covering several application areas, also several different TRL levels, also application areas in agri-food. Some are basically in materials, some are really a bit further away from the consumer. So it's a broad scala of cases to be able to really test and come to these trust barriers, etc. So case 1 is what we call cell factories, so developing food ingredients and additives through precision fermentation. Case 2 is bio-based materials, so biotechnologically produced plastics, textiles, cleaning products, etc. Case number 3 is biostimulants and biofertilize for application in agriculture. Case 4 is what we call climate resilient crops. So it's all about crops obtained through new crops obtained through new genomic techniques. Case 5 is what we call eating the cells. Cultured cells as meat alternatives like cultured meat, but also cells rich in microbial protein, for example. And then case 6, the last one, is bacteriophages, so as alternatives for antibiotics, basically in livestock farming, so as antimicrobial agent. For each of these cases, like I already said, we developed these evidence-based from literature, thus risk-benefit assessments. Okay. Then in the next step, or a little bit parallel, we developed these stakeholder mapping. So we started again from the quintuple helix to cover all relevant actors that we could think of. And together with all the partners who basically represented the different stakeholders, we elaborated these stakeholder mappings. And then after this, we evaluated which stakeholders are most affected by the implementation of the technology and how big is their influence also on the successful implementation of the technology. So then we developed a load of these. It's a bit of a mess, but this was part of the process to really map the different stakeholders that are relevant, and also the lines you see, so the arrows you see between them is also to see like, okay, which stakeholder has influence on other stakeholders, which also added to their degree of impact or influence on the total case. So we did that for each case, each of the 6 cases. And then in parallel, we also did these risk-benefit assessments, like I already mentioned, which was from literature. And then afterwards, so we got a load of risks and benefits also from the different cases on the different stakeholders. And then we mapped these risks and benefits to the different stakeholders. And then in the end, we came to these plots. So we plotted the risks and the benefits and also the influence in these bubble plots. So on the x-axis, you see the level of benefit. So we aggregated the different benefits that each of the stakeholders has. And on the y-axis, you see the risk level. So this is again an aggregated evaluation of the risks that each stakeholder has. And then the size of the bubble basically shows the influence they have. So which gave us the possibility to prioritize the different stakeholders. Okay, so that was then the final step before going to building of the trajectory to prioritize the stakeholders. So we evaluated who is most affected or most impacted by the implementation of the technology or the case. So who has the highest risks of being negatively impacted? So who got a 5 to say so on a scale of 5 of highest risks? Who will potentially benefit the most from the technology? And then also we looked at their influence. How big is this group? For example, consumers are a really big group, so and they will have to buy it. So in the end, they have a lot of influence. And all these factors combined, we decided that who is most at risk for the implementation of the technology and also has a lot of influence are basically the ones we have to assess the trust issues with via co-creation. Whilst the ones that have quite some influence but only have like benefit from the implementation of the technology are not the ones we have to assess the trust barriers with, but basically are the ones who will be involved in the co-design because they are impacted by this trust in the technology. So these are all the actors where we set up we started the co-creation trajectories with whom we basically assessed the trust or the distrust they might have and how they perceive the biotech case. So consumers were for each case they were involved. But why? Because basically it concerns the food they eat, or it might affect their environment or their health. And also, which is an important aspect, they hear things about these biotech cases in literature or on social media, I mean, or media in general. And sometimes these things that they read are not true, and they form their opinion. And in the end, they are basically the ones that have to buy it, both literally and also figuratively speaking. And we also found that farmers also are highly affected and have a lot of impact because it's in some of the cases it concerned their livelihood. Like for example, when it comes to biostimulants and biofertilizers, they are the ones that have to implement and adopt these solutions. They have to use the biostimulants and stay away from other solutions. So they are the ones that are basically responsible for the successful implementation. And also what we found is that farmers often have the feeling that decisions are being made over their head, and they really want their voices being heard. Industry was involved in these initial co-creation sessions to assess the trust issues or the perception on the technology in one case, in the biomaterials case. And that was basically the mainstream chemical industry, because for them biotechnology might be a direct competition. And we wanted to hear like, why don't you switch? What are the issues, the trust issues that you might have with it? Then we decided also on the methodology per case. So how did we involve these crucial stakeholders like consumers, farmers? How did we do that? We based our methodology on design thinking, because design thinking is really inclusive. It's also a very flexible approach, and it's also a very transparent approach. So we decided that for consumers, farmers, and the chemical industry in the biomaterials case, these co-creation sessions were basically the best way of involving them and also really grasping their perceptions and their concerns and come to solutions together with them. There were also the group of what you call the critical voices, which are basically like lobby groups, environmental lobby groups, for example, or lobby groups for organic farming or organic food. Often they are they're smaller. The number is smaller, and often they have like specific official statements and official ideas that they can't divert from. So it's really difficult to involve them in a co-creation process because it would really interfere with the process. So that's why we decided to involve and get a view on their concerns and viewpoints on this via in-depth interviews. And then, like I said, we also will do quantitative surveys, which we are setting up now to validate specific things that we learned. So co-creation brainstorms, like I already said, are a qualitative way of doing research where we can really assess drivers and triggers of these consumers, farmers, etc. We can really dig for the why and get a lot of diversity in opinions. Of course, setback there is that you can't do any statistics on it. That's why we also do the quantitative analysis to get more data. So it's not just a focus group. We used a lot of open questions and had active interaction to get to really assess and get their viewpoints and ideas and also get some free input on things we basically didn't think about. So we followed the prioritization like I explained before with the stakeholders, starting with the ones that are highly impacted and also the ones that have quite some influence on the successful implementation of the biotech solution. After each co-creation sessions that we did, we evaluated the trajectory, and each time we also, if things were not optimal, we adjusted the trajectory or adjusted the approach slightly. And each time we took the learnings from one session, always to the next one. So we got smarter along the road, to say so. So this is basically what's typical for design thinking. It's very iterative. And this is my last slide. So how we set it up very concretely. So we did, like I said, 11 co-creation sessions with consumers, farmers, and also one with industry in Belgium, Denmark, and Spain. Each time we involved 12 to 15, it varied a bit, of participants. For the consumers, it was mostly people without scientific background. We tried to level men and women from different age groups, both conservative and more progressive profiles. We used their eating habits as a proxy to evaluate this. And it was always people who had some interest in food and food production, because otherwise you basically can't get them around the table. So that was a slight bias, of course. For farmers, we also tried to have both conservative and more progressive profiles. And for industry, it was like, for the biomaterials case, it was a mixture of companies and also associated organizations. When inviting the participants, we always carefully considered the communication, trying not to plant any seeds in their head or steering them. We ensured that the atmosphere was really relaxed, also with food and drinks, and we always developed it around 5 central questions. I won't go through that in detail, but each time the 5 central questions were the same. And we used a stepwise approach, focusing really on the why and explaining the specific case in layman's terms so that everybody could really grasp what this technology was about, and also try to be as neutral as possible. So not steering them, guiding them in any way. So making it possible for them to make their own informed opinion. Okay, that's for me. I will stop sharing.
Thank you very much, Virli.
Okay.
Just listening you now, I've been thinking about the past months and all that we've learned on the journey of this co-creation,
Yeah,
not only from you and Charlotte on how to co-create, but also from consumers. It's been very, very interesting listening to them and listening to farmers and listening to the industry. So I would highly, highly encourage anyone listening to us right now who is thinking about taking this step to really get to it. And if you're not thinking about it yet, start thinking about it because it's been really, really rewarding and such a learning experience. So thanks for the great overview, Virle.
you're welcome.
So now we will welcome Virle's colleague and our partner, Charlotte, who will be talking to us about the results we got by listening to these consumers, farmers, and the industry. So I promise this will be just as interesting as what we have just listened to. So, Charlotte, the floor is all yours.
Okay. Thank you, Sophia, for this introduction. So I will dig deeper into the next phase in these trajectories, which was the assessment phase. And so as Verla mentioned before, it is where we took all the insights from all the different cases together, both from consumer sessions as well as farmer sessions. The industry session was fairly recent, so we haven't been able to integrate the results just yet, but we took already the ones from the farmers and the consumers, which was the largest bulk anyway. So in these results, we looked for commonalities and recurring aspects, and from this, we distilled hurdles for trust and acceptance, or as we call them, the trust barriers. So we ended up with 15 trust barriers. Some were specific for consumers, others were specific for farmers, but most of them were actually applicable to both. And we also identified a few key drivers, as we call them. You might remember them from the very beginning, or some of them from the very beginning of Vera's presentation. The fact that things are unnecessary, the fact that there's unnatural or unknown, are drivers and reasoning behind these trust barriers. So they quite speak for themselves, actually. So I won't go deeper into those, but I will give some more clarification on those different trust barriers. So the first one is the fact that people tend to see biotechnology as fake and ultra processed. So we noticed that unlike scientists and experts and all of you listening probably, that you see biotechnology as a very broad field, but consumers do not see it that way. For them, it basically stands for GMO and unnatural things happening in laboratories. So it's messing with our food or playing God. Um, Luckily, it's not always that problematic, but I'll come back to that. From the farmers, we also heard very similar things as for the consumers. So especially for cases like cultured cells, precision fermentation, they see it as fake, unpure, um, and they doubt whether there are not any harmful things within these ingredients or in these plants. So both farmers and consumers, they perceive biotechnological produced foods as unnatural and ultra processed. And knowing that consumers are, first of all, being recommended to, but also trying to move away from ultra processed foods, it seems like a step in the wrong direction to them. So luckily, as I said, it's not always that big of a problem, as acceptance will depend on what the current standard is. So if it's there to replace products that are now made chemically, so also something seen as quite unnatural, or the production process is either unsavory or cruel, then the acceptance tends to be much better. So think about the production of certain food colorings, flavorings, vitamins even, or more in general, actually everything coming from intensive livestock farming, which basically needs to exploit animals and is seen as quite cruel by many people. Um, it also depends on whether these products really differ from what we already know and eat and or find in nature. For example, they were surprisingly open towards eating microorganisms. So that is after we explained to them that it's actually quite common practice in our everyday foods and how fermentation is happening all the time, that their yogurts just contain bacteria as well. They didn't oppose that much to it. Also, the information that products from precision fermentation can made to be exactly the same as what they currently have. So it's just the production process is differently. That was quite reassuring to see that it's quite safe actually. As was the fact, and we were also a bit surprised by this, that NGT1 modified plants can actually not be distinguished from conventionally made plants. Um, that was, uh, sorry. So that was also a very nice fact to know for the people because their reasoning was like, if you cannot detect the difference, it can't be that bad, right? And this was coming from a person who was very skeptical about genetic modification. And that fact may have not won her completely over, but at least it got her less worried. And then the acceptance also depends on the application fields, particularly how close they get in contact with the product. We did expect this, but it was very clearly confirmed when we compared the results from the association exercises from the food sessions with the one we did on biomaterials. So this exercise, we did it in every single session, um, and it was an association with the word biotechnology at the very beginning of each session. And this was before any more information was given, so they just knew whether it was about food or biomaterials through the invitation. And for biomaterials, most associations were positive. So we see words like green, environmentally friendly, future, next level recycling, or innovative. And in the food sessions, we found a lot more skepticism and a lot more question marks, like, is it better for environment or is it positive? For who are we doing this? It's unnatural. It's money making. So it was clear that depending on the context, they associated different things. Which brings me to the second one. So another big hurdle is the fear that these technologies are being implemented for the wrong reasons. So basically, it was mentioned before, they don't really see the need for these technologies, and they are afraid that their only purpose is financial gain. So financial gain by big corporates that will then squeeze out the environment, farmers, and by extension also them, so the consumers themselves. So when they hear how it can be used for like the greater good, so things like securing access to healthy food for everyone at affordable prices or tackling certain sustainability issues, they tend to be more open to it. So they basically need to see that we do not only turn to these technologies to serve ourselves. And then linked to this fear of these technologies being used for financial gain only is the fear of these large corporations holding the power over our food chain. So many people hear biotechnology and they think Monsanto and they think monopolizations. And they see patents as the perfect tool to create and sustain these monopolies. So they feel that enough measures and precautions have to be taken on a regulatory level to prevent these things from happening. So do not underestimate this concern, as it came up in every single consumer session. So it's quite important for consumers. And moreover, it came up in every farmer session as well.
So they are more afraid to be purposely kept in the dark by large seed companies while being made dependent on these technologies. So instead, what they really want is to know what they are growing. They want to be self-sufficient and to be able to make their own choices. The fourth barrier is more about being exposed to certain risks. So we already Phyllis said a lot about these risks and how they hear about it in the media and they read about it on the internet or they see on social networks, or risks they just simply think of themselves. But what they don't know is whether authorities are aware of these risks and whether they are managing them. Because basically, what we notice is that consumers have no idea how food is regulated. So they are not aware that food products and ingredients have to pass like a battery of tests and safety assessments and comply with a lot of rules to be able to be on the market. Well, at least here in the European Union. So they don't realize that many of these risks that they see, they are indeed being addressed to safety measures, precautions, and restrictions. So we need to be more clear on that. But some of these risks they see, they are based on misinformation, unfortunately. And that obviously needs to be countered with reliable and scientifically correct information that does not dismiss their concerns either. So what we noticed is that the participants very much appreciated the fact that we were transparent about the risks as well and open to listening to their concerns, because they don't want to hear just some kind of promo talk, and they need to hear a, a genuine and believable story. It also needs to come from a reliable and trusted source. And that means from a source that has nothing to gain from this technology, but cares about our planet and our society. So therefore, biotechnology researchers may not be the best reference in this case. So environmental researchers and health researchers, they seem like a more reliable source when talking about biotechnology. And also, they tend to have good confidence in the EU authorities as well as an information source, that is. But the problem is not only misinformation, sometimes even the correct information can be misinterpreted and create a wrong impression. So, for example, when cultured meat was first entered into the media or announced into the media, it was often portrayed as this $300,000 or euro burger, which kind of gave the impression that this technology is way too expensive to be realistic and more of a decadence for the lucky few than a genuine option for a more sustainable future. Also, a problem might be that in the media, biotechnology articles or um, cases are often associated with pictures of laboratories, which kind of reinforces the idea that it is very unnatural and only happening in a laboratory. Also, regulatory decisions can give a certain impressions. So they might know that growing GMOs in the EU is very restricted, but what they do not realize is that this is actually a precaution and not based on proven harm. So their reasoning is that the EU government must have good reasons to not allow it, right? So as I mentioned before, they they don't know how food is regulated or regulatory system works basically. So they might draw the wrong conclusions from these information. I mentioned before the farmers being afraid of dependence and therefore also limiting their freedom of choice. But consumers, they fear these limitations too, even though many consumers do not really care about where their food comes from or how it's produced and how long the ingredient list is. They just want cheap and tasty food products. But those who care, and they are actually the ones we had in our sessions, um, they want to be able to make the choices that fit with their values and priority. So therefore, transparency and correct information is essential in this, as is the ability to be able to choose otherwise. So biotechnologically produced foods should never be the only option available. And that brings me to the next point, which is overdoing it. So biotechnology may not be the silver bullet that will solve all of our problems, because on the other hand, if you go in overdrive with it, it might just create a lot of new problems. So compare it with the whole plastic story. When that was first invented, it solved a lot of problems they had at the time. So for example, with storing food and shelf lives. But I think we can all agree that we kind of overdid it on that one, and it created a lot of new problems. So the same goes for biotechnology, and we want to avoid that. So the technology does have great potential, but beware of these side effects. So think of these feedstocks that we were going to need for all this precision fermentation and cellular agriculture. That could actually lead to even more monocultures. There's also quite obviously the competition of biomaterial production with food production, or possible side effects of mass applications on biodiversity, or even consequences on a social level. So people are quite afraid that in the long run, these solutions might turn out to be just as harmful as the practices of the things they're trying to solve. Um, People also wonder whether we're not trying to solve the wrong problems. So, for example, for climate resilient crops. We got a lot of questions about, should we not just try to mitigate climate change instead of adapt to it? And does that fact not give governments even more of an excuse to postpone climate mitigation interventions? So even though at this point adaptation will be necessary, we do need to make sure that we do not lose sight of this tackling this bigger problem, the mitigation part. A similar story we heard on the bacteriophages session. So sure, they may be promising alternative to antibiotics, but should we not focus on drastically reducing meat consumption and production instead, which would also reduce the need for these interventions altogether? So these biotechnological solutions, they can alleviate the shortcomings in the current agricultural system, but actually a more holistic approach is needed in the long run. So when I mentioned the effects on biodiversity, I was referring to the fear of, on the one hand, the spreading of modified organisms into the environment, so willingly or unwillingly, and on the other hand, the effects of introducing exotic, so not necessarily modified, organisms into the environment, so organisms like bacteriophages or microorganisms. A bit like rabbits in Australia. Maybe they are not harmful in themselves, but it does mess, or it did mess with biodiversity. So, and that is not to mention the possible effects it could have when they mutate and do become harmful. And just like it's hard to predict the side effects on biodiversity, it is also hard to predict the long-term consequences on health, since the data is not there yet. So they link it with ultra-processed foods, and they worry about it having similar long-term effects. So a step in the wrong direction. And the fact that absolute safety can never be proven, so scientists will also never make such a statement, that kind of adds to the doubts that they already have. Remember when I first said in one of the first barriers that they don't really see the need to turn to these technologies? This is also in part because they simply underestimate the urgency and the scale of the problem. So even though most people indicated that they know that we are facing huge challenges, still they seem to underestimate the scale of the problem. They admit the current situation is a bit decadent. They do want to adapt a little, like eating less meat or eating more seasonable, but actually they want to keep the freedom of choice at all times. And they think we can still save everything with organic farming and agroecological principles and vertical farming and other technological solutions like that. So we think that maybe they aren't confronted with the consequences enough yet. So prices may have gone up, but in the end, supermarkets are still permanently filled with pretty much whatever they want. There's plenty of meat, there's fish, there's exotic and off-season fruits and vegetable. And when they see all this, they probably think it's not all that bad. From the farmers, we heard a similar story. So they also seem to think that with mere optimizations like precision agriculture, they will be able to meet the demands for a growing population without relying on these technologies. And in the same category of like unrealistic perceptions, we also noticed that quite a lot of consumers have a very romantic view on how food production works, mainly how agriculture works. So people do not like the idea of scientists fiddling with our foods. We get that. But they do not realize that this is just what we do as humans and that we have been doing it since the dawn of agriculture. So they do not realize that our food crops are nothing like their wild counterparts and that they can only grow well thanks to the good care and interventions of the farmers. So one person mentioned, like, you make it sound like our crops are handicapped or something. And we were quite surprised by this remark and replied with, they kind of are. And then we also compared it to the situation we have with pedigree animals, where they suffer a lot of health issues, mainly due to inbreeding, and that did actually enlighten them with a more accurate view on the situation. Number 13 is one that was primarily found with the farmers, and it is the fact that they simply do not believe that this is going to happen anytime soon. So legislation is too slow. Who is going to pay for all this? And then there's also the technical aspects of upscaling, etc. So it obviously depends on the case, but especially cases like precision fermentation and cellular agriculture, they do not really see that happening anytime soon. And maybe that is also because they actually don't want it to happen, because they are afraid that these technologies are going to undercut their products, their production methods, and also their livelihoods. So to them, this shift isn't just competition, it's actually a redefinition of food production and could make them obsolete. So on the other hand, they did show clear enthusiasm for tools that support their craft, like NGTs and bacteriophages and biostimulants. So it's not all that bad. As for the final barrier, we have the obvious worries about increased costs. For consumers, this is quite evident. They see that most sustainable products are usually more expensive, so they believe it will be the case here as well. And for farmers, it is more of a business issue. They fear that these technologies won't be accessible to them due to high prices, but also that the performance of these products will not match the current methods despite a higher price. And that brings me back to the overview. I hope you gained some new insights from what we gained as insights from the consumers and the farmers. And if you have any questions or would like us to elaborate on certain aspects, please let us know. Thank you. Oh, Sophia, you're still muted.
Yeah, many years using Teams, and we can still get rid of not unmuting ourselves. I was just thanking you, Charlotte, for the really interesting overview on the results, and that I hope that the viewers have learned at least something with it. It has sparked some interest again to talk to different stakeholders about this. So thank you very much for that. And now, linking it and continuing our Be Trust journey, I would like to introduce Haylene. Hi, Haylene. Good morning.
Hi, Sophia. Do you hear me?
Perfectly well.
Okay.
Great. So Helene will be talking to us about so we've done the co-creation methodology, we've conducted these co-creations, we've gathered the results, and now what? So what happened with the results? What did we do with them? So what is co-design and how we are implementing it? Because we are right at the moment in the middle of the co-design process. So I will leave the stage to you. So yeah,
Thank you.
thank you.
I will try to share my presentation. You can see it now?
I can see it.
Okay.
I believe everyone can see it. If not, please let us know in the chat box so that we can work it out.
Okay, so we are going to talk about the co-design phase now. So after the co-creation, we analyzed all the results to start the co-design. We want to build trust-building measures and interventions. The people we will involve in these are investors, policymakers, industry, and academia, so different stakeholders. Why those stakeholders? Because they implement biotechnology one way or another. So by implying this biotechnology, they affect some way the farmers and the consumers where we talked about. So we want now that the investors, policymakers, industry, and academia help to find solutions for the trust barriers. We will do 5 co-design sessions in total in Belgium, Denmark, and Spain. Okay. But we are still in the middle of it. The presentation you just saw about the co-creation, well, this is done, so it looks very well, I think, but we are still in the middle of the co-design, so it's a mess. So I will now present you the mess. It's interesting mess though. So for the co-design, we invite 5 to 20 participants. That's a lot of variation, but it depends on if we invite a mixture of stakeholders or only one type of stakeholders. Then the duration of the co-design is 3 hours, and still we have to hurry. So it takes quite some time. If you know that with the co-creation, it took like 2 to 3 hours, but we ate while we were doing the co-creation. It was a bit more chill because now we really want to construct solution. It's quite hard work. So we had a first tryout co-design on biomaterials in the building industry in Denmark. And they involved different kind of stakeholders like architects, but also researchers, legal people from legal, but also constructors themselves. So it was a tryout because this content about the biomaterials, we know it's only one case, so it's a bit more compact. It was perfect to see if our context was well to present. Then we did a first co-design with also mixed stakeholders in Belgium, one in Spain with only the industry, the food industry, and then a second co-design in Belgium with focus on policymakers and researchers. And we took a lot of lessons already, every single session. So again, we work in an iterative process. We learned, if I can say, the recruiting is quite hard because we invite different kinds of of stakeholders. So it's a big job, and not every kind of stakeholders we know as well as the other ones. So it is quite a job. It takes a lot of the time, and on the same time we have to construct the co-design presentation. So it's quite interesting to do. Then the presentation of the co-design, I will come back on it. We adapted a lot, also the presentation of the trust barriers and the timing of our presentation. So here you see the trust barriers we used in the first tryout co-design in Denmark on the building biomaterials. We created specific trust barriers for this case because it's another situation than in the food sector, that is clear. So we provided the participants a week before the event with a glossary about the trust barriers, so they could read it through already. We also provided a bit of introduction on B-Trust for them, so they were prepared for the co-design. So this was our first diagram for the co-design from biomaterials. Then we asked, based on the glossary presentation, and also there was a presentation from a key opinion leader about construction biomaterials. And so especially to pronounce the difference with between biomaterials and the older, not so sustainable materials we use. Some measures, so some solution the stakeholders came with was like one from the architects was to establish a European-backed fund to ensure construction projects using new biomaterials, covering unforeseen long-term issues and reducing adoption risks. Consumer education and information campaign was also asked in what to say what biomaterials actually are, because it's not always clear, and how they differ from existing fossil alternatives, because they are not so healthy either and sustainable. So it's very important consumers are aware. You heard it already in Charlotte's presentation. Then another measure was continuous update of legislation and European taxonomy. So to encompass new materials, and so to include in a new Biotech Act. Then certification scheme for new biomaterials, that was also an interesting measure. It gives more proof that they are all right to use. And so the ones, the building, it enables building advisors to refer to. That's really nice to have. What I wanted to say, though, you see the measures, they're really interesting. And when we asked the participants of the tryout co-design how willing they are to implement biotech solution in their fields in the near future, we can see 33% is already doing it. So that's a big difference with food biotech. This means we saw this also that consumers, they trust more the biomaterials than everything they have to put in their mouth. Food, they are really not so keen in to be adapted by biotech. And the construction is another story. So they are more in the market already. The interesting thing is that with their measures, we can also learn a lot already, maybe what we can apply for the food sector, because for them, all the biotech rollouts into the market still has to come, or a lot of it. So we had another co-design then, the real first co-design for the more food biotech cases. We had one in Belgium and then one in Spain, only for the food industry. In Belgium, it was a mix of stakeholders. So we presented the trust barriers for the food sector. And you see that we had 21 trust barriers, and they were divided into certain groups regarding they were concerning research and technology or economy, the environment, regulatory and government, or social impact. So you could see them like that. And also we incorporated the drivers like the unnatural feeling, unnecessary, things like that. We provided again the glossary a week before the event, so the participants were informed about the trust barriers. But we learned the first co-design that there were a lot of trust barriers, and they found it quite well confusing. And there was a lot of overlap between the trust barriers, which for us was still clear why we did separated them. But for the participants, it was just too much during the co-design. And they also had a lot of interest in who the trust barriers belong to, so the consumer or the farmers, or they were shared trust barriers. So we invented the wheel again, but now we came with this diagram. So at the left, the trust barriers from the consumers, at the right, the trust barriers from the farmers, and then in the middle, the trust barriers they share. Again, we provided them a glossary. But also, you see here that we have 15 trust barriers. So we made a few, less with merging some trust barriers, and that worked perfectly. So if we presented the trust barriers, maybe I go here again, we did it also in different ways. When we look at the first co-design, we presented during the co-design session itself, again, the trust barriers, so with the content of the glossary. This was quite extensive and quite abstract, and we saw the participants had a bit difficulty with focusing. So the next time here, we presented the presentation Charlotte just presented. So it was a bit a resume of the glossary together with the reports we made with remarks and content from the reports we made about the co-creation session with the consumers and the farmers. So it was a more alive presentation. So that did the job better. Still, if I can say something we will change again, is we will adapt a bit the introduction in the co-design. We make it a bit more brief. If the people read the glossary, they are well enough prepared to shorten a bit the introduction, so they have more time for this, the do part. So we have 3 rounds for the co-design itself. Here the participants start to work a bit. So round 1 is about exploring a wide range of possible solutions in groups. If there are different stakeholders types, we mix them in these groups. Some solutions they come in this level with are straightforward. Other ones seem visionary or far-fetched, but that's okay. This is the exploring round. So these are the first measures they think of to solve, to cope with, to tackle the trust barriers. So they got 35 minutes for this. How did they select the trust barriers? Well, they could choose index cards. And on the index cards, you see the title of the trust barrier and the number of the trust barrier. Normally, we let each group pick like 3 or 4 trust barriers, or even more. Then they could write measures down on post-its. Of course, they wrote on the post-its also the number of the trust barriers, so we had the connection, still had the connection. We tried to guide the participants a bit to find solutions. if you just say, oh, yeah, just give some measures you think that will tackle the trust barriers, you get a lot of answers concerning communication. You can teach children in school. Yes, we know that's also very important, but we wanted to be sure that we had different kinds of measures taken into consideration, like behavioral sciences and nudging measures, regulatory and legislative measures, research and technology development measures, and so on. So here I have some measures from the co-design in Belgium. One of the first trust barriers that tried to tackle in the first round was biotechnology is fake and ultra processed. They considered a shared vocabulary with neutral wordings would be a good idea. So on all levels, on legislation level, on research level, in society, so also the media, that there is a shared vocabulary on biotech. But because now there is too many different wordings and it is very confusing. And as we see in the presentations from the co-creation, there is already a lot of confusion, and that we really don't want. So we have to speak the same language about biotech. Then nudging, price taste. So the participants from the co-design thought it was really necessary to do price reductions. So the price from the new biotech products is the same or even cheaper than the original products we have now, the general products we have in the market. So if we introduce them this way in retail, they have a bigger chance to be bought, because we all know consumers' most important is taste and price. So if we want biotech to fly, we have to reduce price in the beginning. So collaboration with chefs was another idea. So you have famous chefs who have TV programs they can use, for example, cultured meat. So it's the topics get more casual for the consumer. A collective narrative coming from a trusted source or organization. This one is connected a bit to the shared vocabulary. We have a shared vocabulary, but we have to use it also in a collective narrative. So we have shared stories. So we do storytelling, and it is really good that this collective narrative comes from a trusted source or organization, so the consumer and the farmers trust this. Another trust barrier that was tackled was misinformation and misinterpretation. The participants said that scientists and regulators have to take responsibility here. So it's really important that the information they give is clear to the consumer and the farmer. And if it's not, that they give enough explanation that is clear and that is on a good level, so the consumer and the farmer understand everything. Then another measure was European foods are again regarded as safe by the rest of the world. This is true. European foods are high in standards compared to other countries in the world. So we should use this knowledge and share it with the consumers that they can trust European foods. That is, well, most safe in the world almost. So then another one was inclusive research. So if we do research, include also social scientists, for example. This is was a very clever measure, I think. Then other examples for the trust barrier: lack of control upon release in the environment, clear legislations. That's very important to start with. Funding of environmental research and funding of monitoring programs. So we don't forget, so that has to be tracked too. Cautious wordings, again, Communication, risk of new versus the risk of old. So we don't explain only the biotech cases, but also what is now in the market and how is this cycle of products and what is lost in the environment. It's not always better, but if you don't inform the consumers, then they can't know this. They are not aware. Then they tackled two trust barriers at the same time, doing it for the wrong reasons and fear of corporate control and dependency. They suggested funding of open science, include farmers in the discussions, and also instead of blaming big companies, co-develop incentives with them and try to involve them, because big companies, okay, we understand the fear of monopolization, but they have a lot of knowledge that needs to be shared. Education in schools, what is on the market and how do they compare with the new food types? Again, knowledge is very important, also about what already exists. Then we come to round two from the co-design session. This is clustering of the measures across the different groups. Where do we see clusters of similar or related measures, and which trust barriers do they cater to? So they got also 35 minutes for this exercise, and it looked then like this. So the participants had their measures on the post-its, and we had papers where they could stick them on, and the papers had the titles with the types of measures they could take, like the marketing and communication measures, and financing and funding measures, and so on. And you see that there are indeed clusters from different measures and different trust barriers, but you can also see how many trust barriers they tackle more than other ones. So that's already a really good lesson. They explained a bit why they did this, and they explained a bit the clusters. Afterwards, there was a 10-minute break. In that time, the Beatrice team looked at the clusters. Sometimes if it were a big cluster, we gave it a new title to resume a bit as a resume of what the measures are for this cluster. And that brings us to the third co-design cycle. So this one is about selecting ideas for clustered measures that could be actually worked on and adopted from a quintuple actor specific perspective. The clustered measures from round two are being actually designed. So we take what we saw in the clusters and we refine it in 30 minutes. To guide the participants a bit, we made a template. In this template, and they could fill this in to refine a bit more their measures, their clustered measures. So the first step was, of course, again, put in the trust barriers you tackle. The second one step is the measures they take. Then the how, what are you going to do to make these measures work? 4, which end user stakeholders are targeted. 5, which stakeholders should tackle the barrier. 6, what preconditions should be met to achieve the desired impact. 7, what would be the desired impact of the activities. And 8, what resources and costs are required to achieve the desired impact. So this was to guide the participants, because we saw it is really hard to not end up with one-liners as measures. It's normal that you see this in the first round of the co-design, but then to get it more in depth, it's really necessary to make a template like this. Otherwise, it doesn't go more in depth. We saw this in the tryout co-design, because we didn't use the template yet then. And then you end up with really interesting input, of course, but it doesn't go far enough. Because if we want to make a governmental model on this, we really want to have detail. So that's why we dig as deep as possible during these co-designs. So the groups were reshuffled for this exercise, now per stakeholder type, if this was the case in this co-design session. And they could select two to three clustered measures to work out more thoroughly. So I have some examples from the third round, the refining round. I didn't write down on the right here all the steps we took, but I took some interesting stuff. The trust barriers were the increased costs. Then the measures taken high over because there were different measures, direct financial incentives. How? They suggested financial support by the government, by taxes or tax reductions, and redistribution of subsidies. So we could have initial equal paying bills or the true price. This means that everybody, the retail, the industry, the regulatory, consumer maybe a bit, but not in the beginning, will pay a part. And the one who gains most pays most in the beginning. So this we call an equal paying bill. This is a very interesting concept, I think, to overcome the first hurdles to introduce biotech food into the market. So everybody pays a bit, so the consumer doesn't have to pay too much. Then a second how was industry and research collaboration. So they should work together with each other and with the suppliers. So the process is as cost effective as possible. This is also clear why. If the process is not cost effective, this equal paying bill, the true price will not be amusing for anybody involved in the introduction of biotech food. Then another activity the participants suggested were for the banks to make sustainable loans possible, so with lower interest rates. Distribution of costs among industry, government, and consumers. This I explained. So sustainable loans would be an addition to make it more interesting for, SMEs, but also for farmers to roll out biotech options in their field, so they are not excluded about the biotech concept, which they feel a bit now, as we know. Okay, here we have another template. So here we tackled poor quality food and are authorities aware of risks. The measure taken was to do tastings. Who should do this? The industry, the government, researchers, retail, social media, and HoReCa. Retail was put a lot of focus on because still now, also concerning the template I showed before, they have still the biggest margins on products. So they have more, margin to play a role in this and the possibility for rollout of biotech products. So they could do research-related tastings to optimize the products, but also promotional tastings. That's for the retail really possible to create awareness and product introduction. But a precondition needed to do these tastings are regulatory sandboxes. I don't know if the people hearing this presentation are aware of what regulatory sandboxes are. I will come to it, but it's a very interesting concept. And then the desired impact of the research-related tastings and promotional tastings is better products tailored to the consumer, because you learn so much about what they like and don't like about the products, more awareness, so less fear and prejudices, and then attracting investors, because if the consumers are interested, the investors will trust also more the biotech food to invest in. Okay, so keep in mind the regulatory sandboxes, because this is another template from another co-design session, more about the regulatory sandboxes. Because we heard this concept in the last co-design, during the conversations in the last co-design, I introduced this topic, regulatory sandboxes, because it's already introduced, as we see, but it's still a bit a gray zone. So with regulatory sandboxes, I will use the example of the tastings. You can do tastings in the retail sector, but if you want people to taste, for example, food that isn't in the market yet, normally you can do this, but that's a problem, because then you can't introduce biotech food, because a lot of the new biotech case foods are not in the market yet. So then you can create regulatory sandboxes. This means that you can do those tastings, but under control of the government. So they make a special occasion to make those tasting possible, but they look out for the consumers who are involved, for their safety. And of course, there are regulations, but they are adapted to these tastings. This is very interesting, because in this way, you have faster admission of innovation, and also regulators can learn from this process, because they are involved. We always talk about that the researchers should be involved too in what the farmers do, because the farmers want to know also what the researchers do, but the regulators really would like to have more vision or a view on all the other stakeholders too. And here, this is a perfect moment. So the regulatory sandbox is an interesting concept. The only thing is, it's not a clear definition yet. And where do you make the line? Because there has to be a line. Not everything is possible. It is clear here on this template, they said that different people profiles are needed to make a regulatory sandbox system work. So you have different types of stakeholders. You need them, different kind of stakeholders to make the perfect definition of regulatory sandboxes, and it will be also case specific. That's why you need a lot of stakeholders to make this work. And that was it for me. I hope that was sufficient. And if you have more questions, please be my guest.
Thank you very much, Eileen. That was very interesting. And I know there is a lot of work behind the co-design methodology. I know it was no easy task. And we're continuously updating and upgrading the methodology with everything that we've learned on the session. So thank you very much for the presentation and for all the work.
You're welcome.
I can't see any questions at the moment, either in the Q&A box or in the chat. So we still have a few more minutes with just the last bit of information that I want to provide. So feel free to ask your questions now. If the questions come up to you later in the day, after reflecting on all the information we've shared, you can reach us through our website, through a platform. So the forum, so feel free to send those questions later. And now I will share my screen just for the final bits of information. Okay, here we are. Just bear with me for a few seconds. Can you see my screen? No?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, perfect. So before we wrap it up, we want to leave you with an open invitation to get involved in BTrust. So we're building a community of people and organizations who believe that responsible biotech needs more than just innovation. It needs trust, which is the cornerstone of this project. And that's where our endorsers come in. We're talking about individuals and organizations who stand behind the BTrust values like transparency, inclusion, and sustainability, and who are ready to show their support publicly by formally endorsing the project. And some take it a step further and become ambassadors. And these are active participants who help put our ideas into practice by applying the co-creation program in real-world settings, and by testing our trust-building measures and sharing what works and, of course, what doesn't, which is very valuable to us. So if what you've heard today has resonated with you, and if that sounds like something you'd like to be a part of, we'd love to hear from you. So whether you want to endorse the project or you want to take on a more hands-on role, there's a space for everyone in the BTrust community. So please feel free to contact our partner, Kim, via the email shown on the screen at the moment, or to contact us through the BTrust forum. There is a link to the forum on the Q&A box that I left earlier during the session, and you can access it through the QR on the screen as well. And just a quick reminder again that the whole presentation, so the master deck, the slides, and the recording of the session will be available in the forum, as well as the recordings and the presentations of the previous 7 masterclasses that we've held. So please check it out if you want to revisit any of our past webinars. Yeah, thank you very much for being here. Thank you for being a part of the BTrust community. We've really enjoyed sharing all of our work and the results with you. And thank you, Susanna, for your comment. And I can't see no further questions. So I don't know if you're shy or if it was a lot of information and you're still coming up with the questions. So as I said earlier, if there are any further questions, please feel free to reach us and we will be more than happy to get back to you. And thank you to the speakers today and all the amazing partners in BTrust for all the work that we're doing. And yeah, that's a wrap up. So thank you very much, everyone. See you in the next one.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.